Hi, Susie Homesteader of the Rockies, and welcome to the Susie Homesteader channel. And today we're going to talk about a larger subject that I just slightly touched on in one of my other videos about spring cleaning. And in one of my lists that I made for you guys on that video, I had a very small section about parasites, household parasites. So today we're going to expand on household parasites, which include mites, because I was lucky enough this winter to acquire a whole kitchen full of mold mites. So I'll tell you how that story started. First of all, I walked into my kitchen area and could not stop sneezing. So there's red flag number one, because I'm not allergic to anything. I have no carpeting, no drapes, very little linens, of course bedding and some of the necessities. But for the most part, have a pretty clean house. So I had to think back a little bit, and I did have, like over a month ago, a super tiny leak coming out of my garbage disposal. That was under my sink, and it was just coming out of the reset button on the bottom of my garbage disposal, and it was barely leaking. And the only way I figured out my garbage disposal was leaking was that the floor right in front of my sink was getting a little squishy. And I do have like a floating laminate floor, so I kind of figured, maybe it was just shrinking and expanding with the cold and the heat in the wintertime. But it was definitely moving more than it usually does. So there was kind of one of my first signs that I might have had a leak. Anyway, make a long story short, I put in a new garbage disposal, made sure I didn't have any more super tiny leaks under my sink, ran some fans, some box fans, ceiling fans, cranked up the wood stove as hot as I could get it, brought in a box fan, brought in a dehumidifier, I also brought in an air purifier, and just about anything else I could think of just in case my floors were not going to dry out very fast. So as you can see, with the kind of flooring that I have, I was super lucky that I could tell the floor was drying because it's also set on top of linoleum, which was the original floor that I had put in this house. Okay, so I thought my floors were all dried out, pretty sure they were, but I came back in like a couple days later and I had this really fine dust all over my countertops. And I just thought it was maybe dust from maybe my ceiling fan not being clean enough. I thought maybe my wood stove was getting full, which it was, and maybe the ashes were starting to float around. So I cleaned out my wood stove, cleaned off the ceiling fans, started doing a little vacuuming, thinking it might be just dust. And then I Googled some information about dust on the kitchen counters, and they gave me the idea that it might not just be dust, it might be mites with the dust. So my first thought was dust mites, right? Because that's a pretty common one. Everybody has dust mites in their house, but nobody really knows how many dust mites they have, but they do survive off of dead skin from people and pets, which I have both of in my house. So I kind of was going with the dust mite route. Anyway, their suggestion was, or a couple people's suggestion was, to get a microscope, which I already had from homeschooling, and get a piece of Scotch tape or packaging tape or any kind of really clear tape if you have it. Put it on the counter where you had the spots or the dust or the kind of like the grainy stuff that you felt, and put the tape on it and then stick it under the microscope. So the whole goal, I guess, was to try and identify what kind of dust or what kind of mite you had. So I did a little homework on that too, but most of those mites all look the same. I mean, give or take a few legs. So I kind of went with the dust mite thing, thinking I just needed to dust because I actually had not dusted my house for a while. So spent 2 days dusting everything with a vacuum, and the suggestion is for sure that you use a vacuum kind of like this old rainbow, but the idea is to make sure it has a base, like a water base to it, not a bag. I guess it's kind of considered a HEPA vacuum because there's no bag and there's no exhaust, which means that when you're soaking up or when you're vacuuming up any of these possible dust mites, the exhaust is not pushing them back out from a bag style vacuum. If you don't have one of these, you either go buy one or go rent one. And this is all in the idea of not having to hire a company to come out here and use their tools and vacuums to do it for you. So I have to say I did find one of these at a thrift store. Super lucky, but it does happen. But you could probably rent one if you had to. But definitely do not use, if you're going to go with a vacuum to start sucking this stuff up, don't use the kind with a bag. Anyway, so there's tip number 1. And also, don't forget to put, if you have any eucalyptus oil, and when you are vacuuming, try and get some of this eucalyptus oil in the water or in the vacuum of some way, because if there is anything that is in the vacuum at some point in time, it really can't survive this eucalyptus oil. And then that way it doesn't go back out into the air because it'll die in the vacuum first. So don't forget your eucalyptus oil. To start with my 2 days of cleaning the dust, only to come back 2 days later and still find, actually I did the entire house, but this whole issue I had was really just focused on my kitchen counters. Anyway, came back, found out that I had still, if not worse, more mites all over my kitchen. And went and got my little thermometer humidity gauge out of my greenhouse, because that was another suggestion that I read on the internet, was to make sure that my humidity was below 50%, which as you can see right now I got it at 45%, and hopefully have my temperature in the house below 70. That was the ticket for not having mites proliferate, because any kind of mite apparently just likes humidity. So whatever kind of mite you got, it's because of your humidity levels being too high, or possibly your house temperatures being too low, which also creates condensation. So there's kind of like this little perfect temperature that you want in your house, which is basically kind of the equivalent of a desert. So you want like a dry, desert-like environment, or kind of like when you're running a hairdryer on hot and you just have, dry heat blowing around. Same kind of idea. So that's what we're looking for. We're looking for like a desert environment, because mites like humidity, any kind of mite. And silverfish and bugs and beetles and anything that likes your house is looking for moisture and humidity. And the thing about that is that they can't drink water, so the only way they get water into their systems is through moisture in the air. So the lower your humidity, the better. So again, going back to the internet, trying to find out all the information I could, and still not sure what kind of a mite I had, but I did know I had a mite. So the temperature, this was key in the house, and that was to make sure that your humidity was as low as possible. So if I had a humidifier on, I shut that off, or anything else in the house in the wintertime that produces moisture, you want to shut off. And of course, while you're doing this, which I did not mention right off the bat, is make sure you have a mask on. And if you're doing the cleaning, which we'll get into in a minute here, with all of your disinfectants, obviously make sure you have gloves on. But because this is also the COVID-19 year, there's a good chance you have some face masks around anyway. So here is your second good reason to have your face masks, because you absolutely don't want to breathe this stuff in, or you are going to go into a full allergic reaction, which I did. And again, I'm not allergic to anything, but I had hives, I couldn't breathe, I got the EBGBs, I felt like things were crawling on me from head to toe, runny nose, the whole thing. So I did have a full allergic reaction because I did not put this mask on when I was thinking it was dust mites. So just do the mask. Now I was kind of going with the theory, if it wasn't dust mites, that maybe it was flower mites, which I knew nothing about. Flower/grain mites is what they're called. And this whole cabinet above me, I had some loose bags of flour, which I never do. Anytime I have flour baking products, I put it inside a baggie, or I put it in a glass jar, or I put it in some kind of a canister that has a really tight seal to it. So, don't buy glass jars or anything that don't seal very tightly. It has to be a tight fit if it is in a jar, which is really the best way to store any of your flours and grains, or Tupperware. But if you don't have that, you can use baggies, but that's not 100%. So anyway, somebody had given me a bunch of flour from their house that they moved out of, and I ran out of space and I ran out of time, and I just shoved it up in the counter or the cabinet, which I never do. And so most of the accumulation of mites I had was just right on this one specific kitchen counter. So my next thought was it must be flower mites. So I did take everything out of my cabinets. I probably threw a couple $100 worth of baking goods out because there was just no way to tell. That's from flour to sugar to cereal, anything like with a grain, millet. I mean, you name it, and if it was in this cabinet and not in one of my glass jars or my Tupperware, I'd throw it out. So, and that's outside, like not in your trash can, like outside. So anyway, threw out everything in the cabinet, went back, cleaned out the entire cabinet with what I used was a 50% bleach and 50% water. But honestly, all you really need is you need 1 cup of bleach to 1 gallon of water, which is what they say is a safer ratio. But I was kind of worried about it, so I did 50-50. But you better have a mask on if you're going to do it this strong. So the real ratio is 1 cup of bleach to 1 gallon of water. Anyway, cleaned out the cabinets with that. And then I did also buy something else, which is called Inside. It's a disinfectant, but it does have mildew stat, fungicide, sterilizers, deodorizers, disinfectants, you name it. And it was geared a little bit more towards mold. And they use this in hospitals and a bunch of other stuff. So I thought, just in case the bleach didn't work, I was going to use this as well. So I did use both, just to be on the safe side. And then there, if you're looking for more of a less caustic, item, this is one I made, which I used a lot of last year, especially during the COVID outbreak in the house, because you can use it on fabric, and it's safe. It's all natural. So unlike bleach, which you do not want to use on fabric, even if it's a color-safe bleach, not a good idea to use on fabric or anything that's going to bleach out. You can make another disinfectant, which I used all of last year and this year. And this one is 50% rubbing alcohol, 50% hydrogen peroxide, a couple drops of eucalyptus oil, and a couple drops of limonene, which is basically just a citrus-based essential oil as well. So, and again, you can look that up on the internet. There's some great other essential oils that you can add to this, like lavender if you want it to smell better, and a bunch of other stuff to make your own at-home disinfectant, which I did do last year because there was no Lysol left in the grocery stores. And I'm actually kind of glad I found this out because it is a lot better for you than spraying Lysol in your house or on anything. Anyway, so there is one that you can use on fabric, pets, people, the whole thing, without having any kind of chemicals or bleach in it. So there's another form of a disinfectant. Anyway, and so I got rid of everything I could in those cabinets, cleaned them all out with these disinfectants, and then went back and ran the fans. This box fan was another great thing. I had a bunch of these. I turned my box fans back on again that I was using to try and dry out the floor, and faced it towards the cabinets that I was trying to dry out that I had just sprayed with disinfectant. Did that, waited about 2 more days to see if they were gone, and guess what? They came back again, and I swear to God, they came back even worse, and they were kind of a slightly different color now. So back under the microscope, still trying to figure out what kind of mite I had, went through all the possibilities of household mites, and finally came to the conclusion that it had to be a mold mite. Now, I don't know if that's the same as a mold spore, so I guess I got those confused because I thought a spore was just part of the air, but apparently there's also a mold mite, which, again, only survive on mold. So went back to my possible theory of there still being some kind of moisture or humidity or major leak down in the garbage disposal I had a month ago. There's still plant mites that you can have in your house. Somebody gave me a dozen roses for my birthday. They could have had plant mites on them, which are also aphids or white mites, so be careful of people bringing flowers to you or in your house, especially from outside. There's wood mites. We bring in wood from the woodshed for the wood stove all the time, but those you can actually see. There's, mites on animals, but now we're talking people, but now we're talking about lice and bed bugs and things that have to survive on a living host. So since this was all in my kitchen, I pretty much eliminated all of that except for the fact that I threw out those dozen roses that somebody gave me into my trash can when they died, and those were also sitting underneath the cabinet. So I kind of thought maybe it was plant mice or white mice, lice, I'm sorry. Anyway, I'm still just not 100% sure. So I had a baseboard in a cabinet, which most people do. When they build cabinets, there's usually a false cavity underneath that cabinet, and then they set some kind of a base, on the bottom of the cabinet where there might be like a 2 to 6 inch gap underneath it, which is the way a lot of cabinets are built. Anyway, so I decided to just start cutting in, which I'll show you some pictures of here in a second, just cutting into some of the baseboard of these cabinets in the event that maybe there was just a puddle or a little bit of something underneath that, or maybe the board itself was still wet, but it did not feel wet. So I took a jigsaw and really carefully cut like kind of just a little trap door into that so that it didn't cut into plumbing or wiring that might be underneath that baseboard. And the first thing I saw, which I'll show you in this above picture here, was a mold puddle. And I had actually even poured bleach like down the hole behind the pipes here just in case there was a puddle. And there was still a mold puddle stuck underneath the base of it. But then there was this kind of a secondary layer of material there that comes with some really cheap cabinets. And then I wanted to cut below that because that still didn't get me all the way down to the base of the actual subfloor. So I, again, cut into the piece of plywood I had on top, then cut into the cabinet board underneath that without getting too close to the plumbing, only to find out that I had probably 5 years, maybe easy, of dog food and insulation that had actually soaked up the majority of the water from the garbage disposal leak. So needless to say, I ripped out all the cabinets, bottoms of the cabinets under the sink here, and then I realized that it probably went underneath these cabinets all the way to the wall, and I ripped out all the base cabinets on this side of the countertop where they were really bad, all the way to the wall. And yes, there was dog food and insulation, dead mice, mold spores, you name it. It was underneath that false cavity from my dishwasher, pretty much from the dishwasher, and of course there was a mouse nest underneath the dishwasher. And then underneath my trash compactor, I had a piece of particle board to just kind of make that slide in easier, and that was soaked with water. So I had particle board under the trash compactor that was soaked, that soaked up some of the water from the garbage disposal. I had a mouse nest, huge, and he ripped out all the insulation in the dishwasher that the dishwasher's wrapped in and made a giant mouse nest in there. And then continued down the cabinet to underneath that board to put in his 5 to 10 years supply of dog food and insulation that they took out of my dog feeders that I have in the house. So here's another thing. I've free fed my dogs out of dog feeders in the house for like 25 years. And my new suggestion is don't ever do that again, ever. Because if there's a way for a mouse to get in your house, and in my case it's through my dog door, they just moseyed on in the dog door, went to the dog feeder, and made their little food supply underneath my kitchen cabinets for probably the last 5 to 10 years. Which explains why the dog was always trying to sniff underneath the cabinets. Anyway, so it filled up, there was enough dog food and insulation under there that it filled up an entire trash can full of dog food, and I had to get a shovel to get it out. I mean, it was that disgusting. And of course wearing a mask and wearing gloves this whole time. So that whole entire one-day project of ripping out cabinets and removing what had soaked up all the water from the leak was absolutely disgusting. And then after I got it all out of the house, I spent the rest of the time disinfecting, with sponges and paper towels and anything that can be thrown out after you're done using it with disinfectants and insecticides. Yeah, so that was a fun day. 99% sure that was the issue. So after I cleaned this as good as I could clean it, I did go out and buy, just to be on the safe side, these little containers, and it's kind of like a cat litter type grainy whatever it is, to just, you can see this one's already soaking up a lot of moisture, and then hopefully some of that moisture drains into the bottom. It'll actually have water in the bottom of these, which you may have to dump out. It's kind of similar to a dehumidifier, so if you don't want to buy, you can buy some really small little like battery operated dehumidifiers, and you can put those in those problem areas to continue to get out the humidity, or you can just buy these, which I'm going to keep in there nonstop anyway. Obviously mouse traps, which I have a ton of in the house, and it's a constant rodent problem out here in the Rockies, which I've talked about in some of my other videos too. But my suggestion is the mice are what created this, and my leaking garbage disposal are what created this entire problem. So this mouse trap is better than poison, because if you poison a mouse and they don't die, well, they'll go die and you won't know where they're going to go die. So my suggestion is don't use poison in a house, especially if you have pets anyway. But if you use these, you catch them and they don't go too far, and then you know where the mouse went, so you don't have dead mice dying in your house. Anyway, so that's the ticket on the mouse problem. You can also get these glue boards. I've used these forever too, but to be honest with you, I've never caught a mouse in this, but it does catch, I doubt you can see inside that, but it does catch all the silverfish, which also showed up, and that should have been like my first sign, because I had a ton of silverfish in the cabinets, and I'm sure it picked up a bunch of the mites too. So you can leave those in your cupboards as well, which I plan on doing. And then the other thing you're going to read over and over is this diatomaceous earth, which a lot of gardeners use, like for aphids and plants, because it's pretty much all natural and safe. But I took a bunch of cookie sheets because I didn't want to dump a bunch of this in my house, because then I would have had to vacuum it all up again. I just put it on a bunch of cookie sheets and left it on the counters. And I did this like when I thought it was dust mites. And I will say, you can definitely tell that there's stuff dying in this, because once they get in, they can't get out, because it's like some kind of like silica thing where they can't move. So anyway, this is another good thing. I put trays all over the kitchen, and in like underneath the sink where it was really bad. So diatomaceous earth is a great one. It's not toxic either, but it's not fun to clean up. Yeah, and so another thing on the mite possibilities, I talked about plant mites that came in on some flowers, but I also found my terrarium that died like a couple of months ago, and just realized as I'm searching the house for mold that the whole terrarium has mold in the bottom of it too. So in the soil, and that's another place where you can get mites, soil mites. So that's going to go outside. But again, you know, mold, terrariums are definitely known for mold anyway. But that didn't even show up for like 2 months after the whole thing died. So good chance there's some mites in the soil of a dead terrarium. Okay, so there's another place for mites. So yeah, you got plant mites, you have chicken mites. Birds are one of the worst for mites, which is pretty much where most mites start. If you have pet birds in a cage, or you have a chicken coop, that's a really bad one for mites. There's also mites on computers, or in like computer towers, in keyboards. Just found that one out. Don't ask me how. That's probably like a dust mite. But apparently, like, computer towers are known for having mites. You know, and you got bed bugs, you got lice, you got ticks, you got wood mites. I mean, you got green. Oh, there's a cheese mite, which is only on cheese and like dried meats, like anything that's been aged or cured. So that if you ever see like a powdery kind of a white thing on cheese, that might not just be mildew, that might be mites, because that's what usually comes after mildew. So yeah, if you look up mites, you're just, yeah, you can't believe how extensive the possibilities are with mites. They told me to put out cloves, a bowl of cloves, a bowl of bay leaves, because that supposedly deters them, but that did not work at all, because they were just in the bowl. Mites, you still got silverfish, which a lot of people have in their kitchens. That is also based on humidity or moisture. You can get beetles, which is pretty common, like a weevil or like a flower beetle. There's another thing you get in grains besides mites. Of course, you have ants, you have earwigs, you have crickets, you have spiders, you have stink bugs, you have centipedes, you got flies, you got moths, you have drain gnats, you have mosquitoes, you have wasps, you have bees, you have mice, you have pack rats, and you might even occasionally have a frog in your house, which I have had in my basement. So, I mean, and ticks, you know, that come in on animals. So the list goes on and on of things that like to come in your house and survive. I will say one nice thing about the Rockies is that for the most part, in the elevation that we're in the Northern Rockies here, we really don't have fleas. People bring them to the state, you know, on other dogs, but they just usually don't survive by wintertime. So there are some things, fortunately, that we don't have here that other states have because it is a drier climate. You know, but not as dry as a desert where you get scorpions and a bunch of other stuff. So I guess you just have to kind of like pick your bug. But there are some things we don't have here. I definitely am not ever going to suggest using like the flea bombs or the bug bombs because they are highly toxic. I did originally when I built my house, I did have a spider infestation. I did have a pesticide company come out and spray my house for spiders, and we did get really sick. So that was a one-time thing, and I can tell you from experience, bringing pesticides into your home is toxic. They'll tell you you won't get sick, but you probably will, especially if you have kids that have allergies. So please, you know, please don't do a bug bomb unless maybe there's an empty house that you haven't moved into yet, or a rental that you have to debug or something like that, but the house would have to be completely empty of everything and then completely aired out. But again, I just don't suggest using those in a house that's being lived in, period. So lots of things you can do, and then more preventative stuff. Something else I'm going to start buying more of. These are like little moisture absorber packets, but this is just one form of it. These kind usually are just so that things don't coagulate, like powders don't coagulate in containers, but I am going to buy a ton of these moisture packet absorbers and start putting them in all of my jars, you know, because they're just not 100% sealed. If you can't get a lid to seal like that, you know, you can put some saran wrap or some wax paper underneath it as well, and then try and seal the lid. But if you're a mite and you want to get in there, there's a good chance you're going to get in there. So the best thing to do is have some of these moisture packets in a lot of the containers that you have sitting around. Again, do not have free feeding dog food or cat food in your house. Super bad idea. Keep your house as ventilated as you can. Obviously another one, you know, keeping your pets clean of ticks is another big one. I just emptied out my humidifier just to see what was in there, and there was some mold in the very, very last bit of water that I had left in there. Check the overflow reservoirs in your dishwasher. If you take out this kick plate, there is a cup in there that will catch any kind of overflow. I had to empty mine out, and it wasn't just some vinegar that I had that went in there when I tried to clean out my dishwasher. There was also a bunch of dead mice, baby mice, stuck in the overflow reservoir of the dishwasher. So that had to come out as well. Anything that contains water, like a coffee maker, an espresso machine that you're not using, dump it out. Refrigerators have those condensation trays in the bottom, just for condensation. I pulled mine out. It was full of water and full of mold, so make sure you clean that out. Air conditioners also have condensation trays, so I don't know how many air conditioners you have, but you're going to want to empty those out too, because there's another spot for mold to grow. And of course, you know, bathrooms, showers, toilets, under sinks, washers, laundry areas, any place where there's plumbing or possible water leaks or possible moisture is where you're going to get mold. So just think in terms of where there's moisture and water, that spells humidity. And where you have humidity, you're going to have bugs, particularly mites. Also, like the bottom of your water softener, if you have one of those, you may not have bugs in there, but that has kind of like a sulfur smell, which is kind of like a rotting organism in that bottom of those water softeners. I've dumped those out before, and that's not pretty either. So good luck. If you have any other questions, come see me on my website, Susie Homesteader of the Rockies, and I will have a list for you of a lot of the things that I just talked about for you that you can refer to, and also some of the supplies that you're going to need to get rid of any kind of mite that you might have in your house. Last but not least, the one thing I have not done yet is get a mold test kit, which I am going to do maybe in a couple more days, because I literally just got rid of all this stuff, just to kind of recheck to see if there is still any kind of mold spores in the air aside from mold mites. So one more item, I'll put that on a list for you that you might want to have, and all in the name of not having to hire a company that's going to cost you thousands of dollars to come in here and do it for you. So good luck, and we'll see you again. Bye-bye. So let's get started. Subscribe to the Susie Homesteader channel, and we'll see you there. Bye-bye.